Okay, everyone, welcome to Therapy in the Great Outdoors. This week, I am so excited. This is a conversation I have waited to have for a while. I'm so excited that Mya Zavaleta is here, and she is going to talk with us about ways that we can have a fresh perspective on social access to nature. And we're going to talk about some easy ways that we all can incorporate more diversity affirming and inclusive approaches in our nature-based work with children. Thank you, Mya, for being here. I'm so happy that you're here.
Thanks, Laura. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, so let's dive in. So why don't you take a moment to introduce people? I was telling Mya before we started recording that I have leaned more into lately letting people introduce themselves because I felt like I was talking at the beginning of podcasts when I would read an introduction. So I want you to introduce yourself. You live in DC. Tell us all about your nature-based practice as an OT.
Yes, thanks. So that's right. I live in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. And sometimes people will say, but is there a lot of nature there? And in fact, there is. We have Rock Creek Park, which is huge. Many, many miles it spans with so many different trails, a creek running along through it called Rock Creek. And it's just such a treasure trove of curiosity, and just the fact that there are four seasons always changing. There's just so many interesting nooks and crannies all about it. So that is where it is based. I have a home outdoor studio where I do my evaluations, and we do some sessions. And then if the weather's particularly windy, there are like lots of branches, or I'm feeling like it's a little too chilly, we do have some space. I have a large sliding room right off of the outdoor space that we can go into too. But it's almost all outdoors in our nation's capital. And yeah, so I provide services for lots of kiddos that have a range of different diagnoses and things going on. Many are neurodivergent. Most, I'd say, are neurodivergent. So ADHD, autistic, and sensory processing difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing lots of children with anxiety and depression and mental health challenges post-pandemic, but really we all know that it existed pre-pandemic, and the pandemic just really highlighted it, and I think intensified it in many ways. I'm a solo practitioner right now, and yeah, I love my practice, and I'm really excited to be able to just partner with nature to provide services to kids that are just needing to get outside their boxes of their homes, their screens, and just feel free and move their bodies and grow and learn with me.
Yeah. So I realized I didn't say the name of did you say the name? It's rooted in DC, right?
Exactly.
I didn't either.
Yes.
So
yeah,
that's my
rooted
fault
in
as
DC.
the host here.
Kids nature occupational therapy. Yes. And rooted is very intentional. Rooted stands for resilient outdoors with occupational therapy and education. So I really harness on that resiliency and being resilient, promoting. Sometimes like this trauma responsive, it really highlights the trauma that people are experiencing and little people are experiencing. I want to really put a spin on it and focus on the resilient promoting aspect of my services.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up. And this is a great example of how the best parts of these podcast interviews or conversations we have about topics on this podcast are actually not things that we've planned. Like this wasn't a topic we planned to discuss, but a PhD colleague of mine is doing her research on moral distress in school-based practice. And this does relate. So one of the things that she often has said as we've gone through coursework together, and I've kind of watched her do all of her assignments and have learned from her, she's really big on the idea that this trauma-informed care is like, she doesn't like the word trauma-informed care. No. Exactly like what you said. It puts this focus on the trauma rather than on the resiliency and the ability of the person to kind of come through, and be resilient. Yeah. So it's interesting you bring that up too, because that's something I've heard from her in a completely different, not a nature-based OT, but just in a completely different way, saying that it's she didn't like the focus on that word. So you're not the first person I've heard. And so it must be a theme that many of you are feeling, who do this work. So
I think for many of us that are trauma survivors, that's not what necessarily defines us. That is part of what makes me who I am, big part of what makes me who I am, but it's the fact that I'm on the other side. I'm surviving,
Yeah.
and it's a journey. It's not every day that, I'm feeling on top, but
Right.
it's really the resilience that I want to
Yeah.
highlight.
Yeah, absolutely. So for your clients, so let's talk about that. Like, I think before we get in, I want to dive straight into, I wanted to say, like, let's talk about that. But we have to define what we mean by
Sure.
diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're going to use this kind of term probably throughout the podcast. Many people are probably aware of it. DEI is kind of how people say it for short, this acronym that we use.
Mhm.
Can you kind of talk a little bit about what do we mean by those terms, right? And then we'll dive into like fostering resilience in clients and why we want to do that, especially when we're talking about DEI.
Yeah. So, in terms of diversity, for some people or some circles, it's like, oh, because it's kind of the woke thing to do, it's the right thing to do. But when you're a person of color, it's not the right thing to do. It's just the thing to do because that's your lived experience and that's the
Mm-hmm.
skin I walk in as a Latina. And then just being in spaces where I'm not an other or one of just feels so much safer and so much more comfortable and welcoming and
Mm-hmm.
rich. And so you said diversity, equity. Equity is that everybody has what they need. And it's
Yeah.
different. People need different things, right? It's just giving everybody the same pair of shoes. Yes, that is fair, but is that equitable? No, because people need different types of shoes. Some people live in different climates. Some people live where they need hiking boots or like strong shoes, or some people don't want to wear strong shoes. They choose to wear flip-flops walking up Machu Picchu, for example. So it's just
Right.
people need different things, are accustomed to different things. It's that people have what they need to be as productive and functional and supported in their lives. So there's another word you said, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that all everybody feels included. And so part of that inclusion for me that's really important is that there's representation. And if there's
Yeah.
representation, then people are going to feel included. And that's something that for me has been a life experience, that a repeated theme for me has been invisibility,
Hmm.
where there's lack of representation. And sometimes when race is discussed, it's black or white. And when you're brown, and sometimes people say, well, black people are brown too, but that brownness of Latina-ness
Hmm.
is in the middle sometimes,
Yeah.
and we don't necessarily are not identified. And even then, like forms, it's those two dichotomies. So
Yeah.
that I really want to dismantle this invisibility that I have felt in many circles in my life, and I know some of my students feel in their world. So yeah, so that's what that representation is super important. And then I like the term IDEA. So in inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, that things are
Oh, I
accessible.
like that.
Just because they're there, it doesn't mean they're accessible. And this is so important in nature space, Laura, because even though Rock Creek Park is there, it's accessible to everybody. Everybody is able to walk, and even there are lots of trails that are paved. Everybody can have access to it, but is it socially accessible? Do they
Yeah.
feel comfortable? Do they feel welcome? Do they feel represented? Are they given programming or opportunities to check it out and see what it is? So I think that's really, really an important word. So I would add the A for accessibility and then the R for representation to that is really important. So sometimes it's called IDEA, IDEA, and then I add the representation is really important.
Yeah. So IDEAR, IDEAR.
IDEA, yes,
You
sure.
made
Yep.
up a new term, Maya. That is yours.
IDEA.
You should TM
Got
that.
it. Got it. On it.
No, but I love that because I hadn't heard of, I mean, I knew of IDEA like in the school, like
Mhm,
here in
mhm,
the
mhm.
US,
Yes,
the school law or whatever, but it
sure.
is it's a great acronym because that A is really important.
So important.
It's like the inclusion is important, but we also have to think about the accessibility for people. And
Mhm.
that is a question I know that we talked about that a little bit on the last podcast I did with Freya McGregor, because her work revolves around increasing accessibility for disabled birders to engage in the
Mm,
occupation of birding. And so we did some discussion around her work with increasing parks' abilities to make their areas accessible to all different kinds of disabilities. And it's
sure.
really hard, right? It's like there's some areas that is something that has really made me sad sometimes at points in my life when I have personally been like on top of a mountain or something and thinking about like there are people in the world who cannot access that, like who just because of the physical limitations of being in a wheelchair can never get to the top of this specific 14er in Colorado, like there's just
Absolutely.
not a way to get up there. And so
Yeah.
thinking about that as therapists and ways that we can kind of work towards increasing accessibility to nature areas, I think is really an important part of our work that we need
Yeah.
to consider. So I love
Yes.
that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of the social accessibility, for example, when I worked in the local middle school, high school as the occupational therapist, I would talk to kids about being in nature, and they would just say, like, Miss Maya, we don't do that. And I said,
Yeah.
tell me more. And they said, well, people don't look like us. And I said, okay, I get it. Tell me more. And they said, it's just not safe. And so, and for
Mm-hmm.
multiple reasons, it wasn't safe for them because they didn't feel like they would be welcome and appreciated in that space. But also, it was because they would say, and the more I said, tell me more, that's like a key phrase I'm always telling my parents, just when your
Yeah.
children are bringing something up, respond with, tell me more. Instead of
Yeah. I love that.
justifying or correcting or explaining to them, just tell me more, give them more. So they would say
Mm-hmm.
to me, there are bears. Well, there's bugs that are going to crawl all over me. They just don't have the concept of what happens in nature and what it
Yeah.
feels like. And so I really have had to step back with those kiddos that really did not have the experience and did not have the comfort and the knowledge and the sense of safety in
Yeah.
green space. So that's super important to break that down with
Yes.
accessibility.
And this is something too that I think we come from a very our own cultural bias, right? Of like nature
Yes,
is great for all kids. Kids are great in nature. It's a place where all kids belong. But that's not necessarily the perspective of many families who have been through maybe have had negative experiences in nature areas, so it's definitely like I think we need to always, when we're doing nature-based services, we always need to be thinking about the perspective of the client and their family, right? It's
absolutely.
very second nature and OT to be client centered, but I think as nature-based therapists, we can get in the nature's great for everyone, and we get kind of
Hmm.
tunnel vision, right? Like,
Yeah,
so I'm
definitely.
glad you brought that up. It's interesting to
Yeah.
think about.
Yeah, and there's a lot of education that has to happen first before we can bring
Yeah.
some kiddos into nature because they're just not familiar with it and it doesn't feel like a safe and comfortable space. So I would do cleanups first with them just because cleaning up, everybody understands that, visually
Hmm.
not looking at garbage is a more pleasant thing, and doing
Yeah.
cleanups along the periphery and then looking at it from a distance and then saying, hey, next time we're actually going to go a little deeper and do a cleanup a little deeper. So I wouldn't jump in and say, okay, we're going to do this hour-long hike and just going to dysregulate them and stress them out and make them so uncomfortable and then sending them back to their classrooms. When I was a school-based therapist, that's no good.
Hmm.
um, so yeah, there are just many layers that you have to unpeel back before bringing some kids that are just not familiar and comfortable in nature. That's so, so important.
Yeah. I love that you already brought that up because my next question was going to be, what are some ways that you slowly introduced kids? Are there any other things that you did besides, I mean, I love the cleanup idea. That's a brilliant
Yeah.
idea to kind of a
Yeah.
functional kind of let's help our school environment or the edges of the
Yes.
schoolyard. Like,
Yep. Yep. Yep.
that's great.
Yes. And then I do a lot of perspective taking with them. And so, especially when they say they're going to be bugs or bears, or in which to some degree there are going to be bugs, absolutely. Bears, not so much in my area. But I will let them know that it's actually us that are the strangers in this space because guess what? Bugs live there and mice live in there. And so I have a visual of like what they will see. You're going to see squirrels and these types of birds and these types of bugs. We're not going to see bears or tigers or these other things that they're saying. And we are the visitors and they are welcoming us into their space. And then they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't think of that. I guess it is. And then we're big and scary to them just as much as
Yeah.
we feel scared of them. And so that really, and some of my clients that have anxiety with critters and bugs that I currently see, that perspective taking is really, really helpful because I'm like, what do you think they're looking at right now when they see your face got really close to them? Because they're like, jump back because they were climbing the tree and there was a big spider. Like that must have been really scary for them, huh? And what do you think they thought you were? Like this big Godzilla, right? But you're
Right.
not. You're such a nice kid. You're like just a curious kid climbing a tree. Isn't that so cool? So just humanizing it in that way for them is really helpful. And then
That's
something I
great.
always do is within the first few sessions, I do a land acknowledgement with kids. And even if they're like
Yeah.
tiny, I just will explain to them that we weren't the first people on this land.
Hmm.
Really important people named Nacotchtank, Native Americans, and Anacostans. They sound like different names, but Anacostan, there's a river here that's called the Anacostia, and that's where the Anacostans come from. And so just give them that sense. And then we
Yeah.
talk about helping with the perspective taking. What do you think it looked like when they lived here? Do you think the creek was like this? And where did you think they maybe slept or ate or, just help them see
Hmm.
like the bigger picture of what people's lifestyles and the people that came before us that we always have to honor and respect.
Yeah.
So that's super
That my
important.
husband lived in Anacostia like 20, 30 years ago now.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And yeah, I learned something new because I didn't know it was named after Native Americans. But I've always
Hmm.
heard him say I used to live in Anacostia. Like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
like he
Yeah.
lived in DC for 10 years before
Oh,
I knew
okay.
him. So yeah.
Yeah.
We've never been. We've been meaning to go, but I digress. Sorry.
Yeah.
He always says the cherry blossom season is when we need to go. So
You do. It's
someday we'll make it
beautiful.
there.
Yes. Yes.
I've heard
Yes.
it's so beautiful. Okay, so I love those ideas because I think they will help us all as nature-based therapists to not assume that all kids are going to be comfortable immediately in an outdoor setting. And some great ideas there for just like even I mean, I think land acknowledgement is important anyway, even if kids are comfortable in nature, right? For them to
Absolutely.
just
I do that with every
pause
client.
and
Yep. Yep. Yep.
yeah, I think that's so great. So just getting to know that's a strategy I think we all need to do. And this came up a little bit in the discussion in the Therapy in the Great Outdoors forum a while back because I wrote a land acknowledgement statement for my private practice and I still have not posted it. I keep it's like written, it's done. I still haven't gone onto the website and clicked edit and done all the footer stuff.
Hmm.
But I took a lot of time to write it, and I feel like in some ways the discussion in the TGO group was about like the hesitancy that I have. It's like I worry that it's kind of like what you said at the beginning about like it's so woke to be like
Hmm.
inclusive and stuff now, right? And
Yes.
it's like in some ways I think I feel nervous to put the land acknowledgement on my website because I worry I know I need to do it. And I'm just being totally real here. And at the same time, I worry that I did something wrong or I wrote something wrong or someone's going to be mad at me that I did something wrong. And so that's not the reason I haven't posted. I honestly just
Hmm.
have not made time. I will acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But like, there is a little bit of that like nervousness in me about it. And it was Freya and I were kind of having the conversation about it. And she was just like, just do it. Like, you just got to get it out there.
Yes.
Like, it's
Yes.
representation, right?
It's absolutely
It's like
representation.
honoring. Yeah.
Yes. And sure, there might be wording or something. I mean, have people edit it that you trust are going to be informed in that area. And I think about what is missing when you're not doing it. You know, it's not
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
much it's what piece is missing by omitting that or leaving that out or having that sitting there and not reaching more eyes. And the message that it gives is really, really important one.
Yeah.
If you believe in the idea or
Yeah. Yeah.
concept.
It's
Yeah.
in some ways too, I felt like I just wish I had someone who actually was Native American who would look at it and tell me that it was
Hmm.
like, I
Hmm.
don't want to offend, right? And
Hmm.
I think what I'm learning in all of this as I lead a business and just in the work I do, like I feel like it's kind of one of those things where you just have to take the risk to try to do the right thing
Hmm.
even if you're scared that it's going to be wrong in some way or you're going to say something because these issues can be, let's be real. I mean, DEI, it can be hard to talk about these things without offending or making people upset. And I just feel so strongly that we have to have these conversations
Hmm.
and be willing to engage in the conversation about things and be willing to be wrong and to feel like
Yes.
our feelings were hurt or whatever, or maybe we said something wrong and we had to apologize.
Hmm.
Like we have to be able to have these conversations or else we're just not going to make progress in this area. Like,
That's true. And the
so
concept that it makes us uncomfortable, that discomfort is okay, because if it doesn't
Yeah.
make us uncomfortable or all comfortable, then something's not right, because we're not having those
Yeah.
hard discussions, those brave discussions, those courageous conversations.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure you can reach out to Native American local branches, local communities that can give you insight too, if you wanted to dig a little deeper.
Yeah, to
But
like say,
yeah.
hey, is this offensive to you? Like
Yeah.
that's my
How can
fear,
I
right?
most,
I'm
well, how
yeah.
can I most kindly honor the richness that the whatever community is, if it was here, Anacostans have brought to this space?
Yeah.
I deeply value that. That's going to be something I want my clients to see. I want this to be honored.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think it can be done in a way that's very deferential to their perspective, and
Yeah.
not to say that there's one perspective, but somebody who can help with that representation is important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Representation too. I was going to ask this question a little earlier while you just said that word again. It reminded me. I really try, and I know that other practice owners have done this as well, try to have different images on our practice websites that
Mm-hmm.
have all different kinds of kids represented, right? The struggle I think for some that I have heard from some business owners is that, are you misrepresenting if you don't have people of color in your practice, right? Are you misrepresenting if you're using images? I would say you're trying to include by having those images, but I
Yes,
but I would love to
yes.
hear your perspective on that. Like,
I think it's really important, if that's what you're seeking and that's what you honor and that's
mm-hmm,
what you welcome, put it on there. Because otherwise, me being a Latina mom and I'm looking for services for my child and I don't see any children of color, I might say, oh, that might not be the best fit. It might not
yeah,
be a space that my sons are going to feel most comfortable. But if I do see kids of color, I'll say, oh, okay, then this person must be an
value, yeah,
advocate and
yeah,
value diverse people of diverse backgrounds, and we would be welcome in this space.
yeah,
So I think it's important, if that's something you value, to have that represented. Ideally, that you are bringing in a diverse client population. It also depends on what part of the country you're in and what communities you're in. But yeah, I think if that's what you value and that's what your goal is, then put that out there. Absolutely.
yeah. It can be harder in some areas of the country or some,
Sure.
rural areas maybe where it's just going to be a more homogenous
Sure.
population of people, but that doesn't
Hmm.
mean that your website can't have a land acknowledgement on it or have inclusive images of all different kinds of people. Like it really it is important, like that
I agree.
representation, to like communicate with families about that.
Hmm.
Okay, let's talk about, I know we've already shared a lot of, or you've already shared a lot of good like practical things that we can
Hmm.
do.
Hmm.
But I wonder if we could talk a little bit about the tension, I guess is a good word, of
Hmm.
being a cash-based practice and wanting to serve a diverse a diversity of people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. That may not
Hmm.
be race, right? But just
Hmm.
the
Socioeconomic
diversity is,
diversity.
yeah,
Hmm.
socioeconomic diversity is a thing. And
Hmm.
I don't mean, I mean, my husband gets, he's Latino too. He gets really annoyed when we make assumptions that like all Latinos
Hmm.
and blacks are poor. He's like,
Hmm.
hello, like that is not
Hmm.
true. Like, so I don't mean to make that assumption at all, but I do know that there is inequity in the socioeconomic system, and so I think running practices where we are charging cash, we're not taking insurance maybe. You are not insurance based,
I
correct?
do. I am not insurance based. I offer super
Right.
bills, but that's it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is
Yeah.
a great question for you,
Hmm.
especially because this
Yeah.
is your heart and what
Absolutely.
you really, really focus
Yeah.
on in your work. And yet your business is cash based. So
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that. I want to hear your thoughts on that
Yes.
and like ideas you
Yes.
have,
I
and
do
I know
have
that's a
inner
question.
conflict. Yes, I have. I absolutely have conflict with that for myself, because my prices are high for many families. It's not accessible financially for all
Sure.
families. I seek out other opportunities to be able to access those communities that cannot necessarily don't have access to my services. For example, I consult with a school for adult immigrant learners, and I provide services to I consult with one of the teachers, and then I provide services to some of those clients, the students at that school. And it's such a rich experience because it's not peds, it's older adults
Hmm.
that are just so hungry and so curious, and they're coming from such varied backgrounds. And so I infuse nature occupational therapy into my services with them, but it's also more school based, like really helping them break down some barriers. Many of them have had lots of educational trauma in terms of just their schooling from their home countries, and many of them are, I'd say majority of them are over 40. So they're well out of like their, younger school
Yeah.
years, but they just carry such a difficult history with education and feeling valued. And one of my clients' aunts, who she lives with, said, "But why does she even have to go to school? She's not going to do anything with it. I mean, she's a grown woman, but there's so
Mhm.
much that she's so curious about learning." So, anyways, just to say that I really seek out other opportunities to be able to access those communities in different ways and creative ways. Another thing I do, I was just asked to do some training for, and this is twofold, so training for Montessori aides at a local elementary school that are all Latina, and I'm going to be doing that in Spanish. And I
Cool.
love that because I'm able to teach them about nature occupational therapy, and then they're going to pass on some of the
Yeah.
strategies and sensory based strategies for the preschool. And then my hope is that they're going to bring that to their homes because they're going to be
Yeah.
abuelitas and tias and mamas. And I'm going to say, hey, all these things I'm teaching you with these students are great things that you can incorporate with your kids that are in your homes or in your communities or in your environment.
Hmm.
So it's like the trickle down effect that that's going to have. That's really exciting. And there was something. Oh, and I was recently asked to speak to a group of 25 to 30 attorneys that are legal advocates for children in the foster care system, and
Cool.
the benefits of nature for children who have experienced complex trauma, which is very near and dear and very
Oh,
personal
that
to
is
me. Yes.
so important. Oh my gosh.
So,
That's
so important.
incredible.
Yes. So I feel like just opportunities like that, like seek out other
Yeah.
ways to still support communities that are not necessarily clients that I'm seeing, for their, package pricing and all this stuff, that business
Right.
side, but just other ways that I can still infuse my perspective, my knowledge, and be inclusive and accessible to other communities.
Yeah. And in some ways too, like in my like business brain, I'm thinking that service that you give for, I mean, I don't know, some of those might be paid gigs, but even if they
Hmm,
are,
hmm.
like they're still in service to the broader community, and they still bring awareness to your business. So they're not necessarily like you're, because I'm thinking about all these opportunities that you have, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like how's she going to have time to do all of it? But
Yeah.
really, it's like bringing your expertise to a wider community, and also building more awareness in the community about your business at the same time.
Yes.
And I love that the idea, like a lot of times, what I have frequently said to people, and maybe that's why it feels like old news to me, is like, just because you run a cash-based practice doesn't mean that you can't give scholarships to people. You can
Hmm.
give scholarships to kids, right?
Absolutely.
Like you can just plan
Yes.
that you're going to have a certain percentage. Like that's what we do
Hmm.
in my practice. Like a percentage of the kids have
Yep.
scholarships every year. But you do get to a point where it's like, you have to keep the business profitable. You have to be able to pay people or yourself if
Hmm.
you're the one providing services, and you can't just give away everything. You do have to have
Yes.
a limit on how much you give away for free. So I
Hmm.
love that idea of like looking for opportunities outside of maybe the direct service that you provide in order to serve
Yes.
the broader community in a way that might even have more impact than just the one kid that you see, really.
Exactly.
You
Yes. And
know?
another thing I do is I go to farmers markets and different types of community events, and I'm kind of
Hmm.
like a question and answer table. Like, do you have any questions about your child's development, or look at these games or activities that you can do outside with your kid? So it's just being a friendly face that has resources and ideas.
Yeah,
And sure, it is marketing, but it's also I'm not getting much return on that in terms of getting new clients, but I'm a fresh
sure.
face and a different perspective, and just see so many more kids than I would normally see coming in, my door as a new client.
Yeah.
So that's just another way. That's pretty easy lift.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question about, I asked this was like 2.5 years ago now. I had Sheila Ivlev on my podcast.
Mm-hmm.
She runs a business called OT Bay Area, and she does mental health mostly with adults. A large focus of her work is healthcare inequity,
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying it wrong, decreasing inequities in healthcare. And
Sure.
so in mid 2020, when the, it was intense, right, in America during that
Mm-hmm.
time, I had her on my old podcast, and we talked about, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, all the things.
And
And
representation.
yeah, and representation. Yes, I forget the R on the end. The idea is easy. IDEAR. That's what I need to remember. But one of the things I asked her that I'm interested to hear your perspective on is like, as a white woman, right? Like I'm like Irish, I'm all the white things, Irish, English, I don't even remember them all. Italian, like I'm 5 different things, Dutch and German. Okay. So that's my family background.
Mm-hmm.
To everyone in America, I appear as like a white lady, right? And I was living in California for a very long time, and I had a lot of concerns about myself as a white woman coming into, like, for example, I worked in Oakland schools, and there were a lot of schools on my caseload that were primarily Black and Latino schools, right? And I always hesitated because I felt like as a white woman, I did not want to presume anything. Like I didn't want to come in as someone that was like telling people what to do, even if it could have been very helpful maybe to like connect kids to nature, or whatever it may be. Or at the
Mm-hmm.
time, I wasn't even a nature-based therapist. I was working in schools. It would have just been something about fine motor skills or something like that.
Handwriting. Yeah.
Yeah, handwriting, whatever, sensory strategies, right? But I felt so hesitant because I didn't want to feel like I was being preachy or teachy to a
Mm-hmm.
culture that was not my own. And I'm wondering what you would say to that, if you have any thoughts about that, or like how to navigate that. I mean, I know you're not a white
Yeah.
woman, but like what would you say to someone like me is what I'm saying. I'm just trying to be really honest here, because I think these are
Yes.
the things like that, like a lot of people who are white won't say because they're
Mm-hmm.
nervous. So
Yes.
like
No, I
usual,
appreciate
I'm
that,
going to
Laura.
say the
No,
things.
no. So I would say just hang back more and observe more and listen more and ask more questions and
Yeah.
let your clients who share a different background tell you what's important to them, what they value, especially really leaning into the families. And I
Mm,
don't know if there have been some language barriers, but really asking what's important to them, what they do for fun, what they enjoy, what's missing, what they're
yeah.
seeking in your connection with providing services or working with them. Because they know what they want and they know what they're seeking and what they're needing, but oftentimes they're not really asked. It's assumed. So I think, yeah, hang back and observe and ask questions, listen. That's super, super important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's good to do. Yeah. It takes time,
Yeah,
right? It takes
absolutely.
time and like thoughtfulness, and maybe it's not the approach of like, okay, we're going to come in and do an in-service. It's more like just
Yeah.
one-on-one, like really seeking to listen to people is a key
Hmm.
thing that we can do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not quick, not always quick answers. And
Mm-mm.
yeah, it's a process. It's really developing a rapport and trust,
Hmm.
yeah, which takes time.
I think about Jose's family. This is a little bit of a pivot, but I do think it's relevant, so I'm going to bring it up. So his parents were jibaros. They were country people, like rural people.
Hmm.
And they grew up in very close connection in nature. Like they
Hmm.
cooked on wood stoves their whole
Yeah,
lives, before they
absolutely.
came
Yeah.
to America, and when they were 30, they
Hmm.
were raised in Puerto Rico. And I think the interesting thing is that as they assimilated kind of to life in America, although my husband says like his friends would come home with him from college, his Puerto Rican friends, and be like, your house is more Puerto Rico than my house is in Puerto Rico, like because his family like really
Brought it all with them.
maintained,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
they maintained the traditions, and their house is just very like full of Puerto Rican loveliness, and so and food and all of that, the whole culture, music and all that. But I think about how like his parents grew up. I mean, one generation, right? We're talking one, his parents are still alive. They're 86 and 91, but they grew up in such close connection with nature.
Absolutely.
And yet, if if my husband was a little kid right now, and in my practice, and I met his parents who are like living in the inner city of Milwaukee in this tiny house, very poor, right? My assumption as a white OT might be, well, they don't really value nature. They don't have connection in nature.
They
They
don't
don't,
know what nature is. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Like
Sure.
we would have these assumptions. So I just share that story to say, like, you just don't know. You just don't know because his parents, I'm sure, have vivid memories of living in very close connection in nature. And somehow in one generation, the move to the States to a very urban area, right? That kind of got lost with their kids. Like
Mm-hmm.
none of their kids are really outdoorsy people, for lack of a better word. I mean, my husband will
Mm-hmm.
self-admit he's not really an
Yeah. Yeah.
outdoorsy person. He'll go with me, but he's not going to like plan the
Seeking
camping
it.
trip, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's interesting to think about our roles as therapists. Maybe we're connecting kids to nature, like reconnecting them with like a past thread of living in connection with nature that their ancestors probably had, like,
All our ancestors had. Absolutely.
yes,
Yep.
exactly.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
It's where we all came from.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's
It's kind
important.
of sad and like hopeful at the same time, like that we
We're
have that work to do.
completing the circle for them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Bringing them
Right.
back to nature. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what haven't we covered? Were there other things I feel like are there other things that you feel like people should know as we're working with children? How can we be very intentional about these things? Are there other things that come to mind? I know we've talked about a lot of really practical ideas, but are there things that we didn't touch on yet? And okay if no, but
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm just looking at things that I've written down I wanted to share. I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot of terrain.
yeah, I think we
Yeah.
have too. It's been a great conversation. Last thing I would say, are there resources that you would recommend people access? I know that I had a resource for writing a land acknowledgement statement to put on your website that I used, which I shared inside
Hmm.
of the Therapy in the Great Outdoors group. So I will include that with the show notes of this episode because I had some resources that like maybe you might have even shared them because I know I tagged you asking about it because I knew it was something you had
Oh,
had
okay.
experience with. But
Yeah.
this was a long time ago. It was probably 7 months ago.
Mhm.
So I'll share those, but are
Yeah,
there
there's
other
one
things?
great article that I love that's The Nature Gap by the Center for American Progress, and it came out in July of 2020.
Mm,
And it's the title is Confronting Racial and Economic Disparities in the Destruction and Protection of Nature in America. So it's really highlighting that people of color, families with children in low-income communities are most likely to be deprived of the benefits that nature provides. So much of what we're talking about, but it's not to say that all, obviously, as Jose very importantly highlights, not to say that they are always coexisting, the poverty and people of color, but that there's disproportionate lack
yeah.
of access to nature for those communities. So it really highlights in so many different ways that so many communities of color are really lacking or being deprived of the nature benefits. So I think that that's a great article to look at.
Is it publicly available or is it one that you
I'm
have to
pretty
pay
sure it
for?
is. I'm pretty sure, no,
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's publicly available. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, we'll look
Yeah.
for it and link to it in the show notes. And the other thing, I'm glad you brought up an article because I would have forgotten to mention this. Children and Nature Network, they have
Yes.
you can get on I don't know where it is exactly that I got on this list, but you can get on their list to get their research digest and they send
Mm,
like every quarter or so, maybe every month. I'm not sure how frequently they do it, but they send like they'll do a topic, right? Like nature-based education in preschool or whatever, and they'll review a bunch of articles and kind of share some
great.
abstracts about
Yeah.
it. And this last one that they sent was all about like basically diversifying nature, like ways that we can like seek to be more inclusive. And I was like, it's perfect for my interview with
That's
Mya.
great.
So
I'm going to
I'll
check that
see
out.
if
Great.
yeah, I don't know where to access them. I'm not sure if they publish them on their website or if it's only
Yeah.
through their email. So I'll do a little digging around after we
Yeah, I'm a
end
member,
the
but
recording and
I wouldn't be surprised if I didn't get it because I click something like, don't send me emails. I'll check it out if I
Yeah.
want to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes
So
I can forward it to you. I can forward you I'll do that because I
yeah,
know I
that'd be
can
great.
find it in my email. I just don't know if I can put a link in the show notes for this episode of where to find the synopses that they did.
Okay.
But there were so many articles, and I actually printed it out to kind of review more closely because it was so long. I was almost getting tired of like looking at my screen. I just wanted to kind of leisurely look at it and read it for fun,
Yes.
with a cup of coffee or something. So
Yeah.
so there's lots of, I mean, there is, the research is pretty clear that at least what I've read in like my literature review for my PhD and stuff, it's pretty clear that there's a history of people feeling excluded from certain groups in natural spaces, right? So the more that we can do to like foster that inclusivity and that acceptance and that belonging in those spaces, there's this phrase I love that people need to belong before they become. So it's not like we can expect that like children that we see for therapy will become these environmentalists when they're older unless they feel like they belong in nature first. And it's like that happens first. And so, maybe just the simple thing we can do, like you said, listen. I mean, listen to people that are different than you and seek to understand them and like figure out how we can make those small steps to help people feel like they belong in nature spaces, I think is a huge thing. So
yeah. And I remember even talking to my young teens about trying to expose them to nature and bring them into nature and invite them with me. I remember telling them that I'm here in nature and I belong here. And it feels so good to be in this space that I cannot let other people decide whether or not I belong somewhere.
yes.
And I don't want to give them that power, right?
Yeah.
So that's like my chingona self. So chingona means badass. That's my badass self saying like, no, I belong here. And I had the opportunity of other people bringing me in and helping me feel so comfortable in nature. Now it's just part of who I am. It's my daily practice.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just want to impart that on other young people of color that this is our space. We're here. It feels too good to be deprived of that.
Yes. Yeah. It's so interesting you brought this up because one of the themes that came up in the research I did when I interviewed all these, they were all occupational therapists. Sorry, anyone who's listening, if you're not an OT, I wasn't allowed to include anyone not OTs in my research because I'm getting a degree in OT. So, but I interviewed 22 therapists. And one of the things that came up about why people appreciate nature as a space to practice pediatric therapy is that it levels the playing field. Like it's this neutral space. It's this neutral space where the adult there's no sign in a natural area generally. If it's a pretty, more kind of a wild setting than like a playground being built, right? If it's a nature setting, there's no announcing of like adults set this up for you the way there is in a clinic. Right. And so
we come upon it in the same footing. Yeah.
Yeah. You're on equal footing. And that was another finding too, is that part of the impetus for change in nature-based therapy is that the therapist and the child are going through the challenging things at the same time. There's not this power dynamic of like the therapist is putting the challenges out there for the child and the child just has to do what the adult says, quote unquote, right?
Absolutely.
And so it kind of ties into like what you just said about like this space it's a space that's neutral. Nature accepts everyone. Like it's just really cool. So
yeah, it's not engineered.
Yeah, it's not engineered. That's a great thing. So tell everyone, let's wrap up and we can tell everyone, where do you hang out online? Where can people find you if they want to follow you or connect with you or talk more with you? Tell us where you are.
I am on Instagram. I am a slow tech person, but I am on Instagram, Mya Zavaleta OT. So please follow me, share, comment. I love hearing your comments. And my website should I share my website?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's rootedindc.com, www.rootedindc.com. And yeah, check it out.
And you have some really great Instagram reels I don't even your reels are so great. Like just what you were sharing about like activities that you've done. And like, I just love them. If you want to, okay, I am someone, I confess, I can count on one hand the number of times that I've actually gone to look at show notes for a podcast episode. So I'm going to spell your last name here in case people don't want to go to the show notes. So
that's fair enough. Yep.
Z as in zebra, Avaleta. So
yep.
Mya Zavaleta, and Zavaleta, not Leta. I'm saying the E like an A sound because I'm like Spanish thinking in my brain. I don't know.
That's okay. Zavaleta. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how you spell her last name. Her first name is Mya. So you can find her on Instagram and connect there.
Please do. Absolutely. Thanks, Laura.
Oh, thank you so much for being here, Mya. This was such a great conversation. So many practical things for people to do. And I just am thankful for you for taking time.
My pleasure. It was great to talk to you.
Bye.
I appreciate you. Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us today for Therapy in the Great Outdoors. If you can't get enough, if you just want even more information about nature-based pediatric practice, head on over to therapyinthegreatoutdoors.com. At that website, you can join our free community, Therapy in the Great Outdoors, that has loads of resources for you to support your nature-based work with children, as well as a free ebook that I wrote called the Nature-Based Practice Roadmap. It is a guide to help you focus and avoid costly mistakes, which I might have made myself, as you start or grow your nature-based pediatric practice. On the website, you can also join the waitlist for the Contigo Approach online course. Contigo stands for Connection and Transformation in the Great Outdoors. This course will teach you everything you need to know to become an expert in nature-based pediatric therapy. To my knowledge, it is the only evidence-based, operationalized framework for pediatric nature-based therapy. And what that means is that when you take the Contigo Approach course, you will have a shared mental model for yourself, your clients, and your team. And this is how you grow a business, by having a framework that you use in your business that helps kind of anchor everyone to what is going on here and what are we doing. You'll learn about the research-based and theoretical foundations of nature-based practice and loads of practical how-tos about nature-based practice. How can you do nature-based practice in alignment with the evidence in order to get the best results for your clients? So a lot of times when people start out in nature-based work, I think they're DIYing it, which is fine. We learn a lot by DIYing things. However, you're not often sure if you're doing things correctly. And that means you could be making mistakes that could be costing you valuable time with families and children and getting them the outcomes that they really want from your session. DIYing also costs you personally valuable time and money as you are getting started in nature-based work. And this course can save you all of that time and money. This course also includes lifetime access, including any updates we make, and ongoing mentoring for years to come on our mentoring calls that we offer with the online course. So truly gives you everything you need to become an expert. I promise that. And it's the only course that will guarantee that for you. So head on over to therapyinthegreatoutdoors.com. You can also go to contigoapproach.com, but I have tried to make everything available at therapyinthegreatoutdoors.com to make it easy to find all of the resources there in one place for you. That's it for today. Get outdoors, connect, reflect, and enjoy the business and practice of therapy in the great outdoors.